I'm Mike Graham, and this is Talk TV. And it's our turn this week to look at what's happening in Putin's war. Over in Ukraine, there's been a lot of action. In Russia itself, there's been plenty of politicking. And of course, we've had the rest of the world's reaction as well. We're joined, as ever, by Hugh Andree, military strategist, military expert, to tell us what the news is. Hugh, good afternoon. What's been happening this week?
Good afternoon, Mike. Well, as we were talking last week, it was all about Kherson, the tactical plan withdrawal by the Russian troops from Kherson. And as I mentioned back then, really, in order to extract their significant force of undertrained of soldiers, but also to really focus on the Donbass region. And what's happened now is, of course, Ukrainian forces have gone into Kherson, and frankly, what they're finding is pretty abhorrent. It's pretty disgraceful, and I think the war crimes that are now going to come out of that are already being reported on. And in fact, there are currently 226 citizens of Kherson who have disappeared and accounted for.
Right, and these would be bodies they haven't found, presumably.
Correct. Yes. What the Ukrainian forces have found so far are 11 different places which clearly were used for torture, for interrogation. Sadly, they contain bats, metal bars which have clearly been used on human beings, and in some cases they found chairs with gaffer tape around them and electric shock equipment. So men, women, and sadly children will have been tortured. And so, yes, so those crimes will now be followed up on.
And at what point does the UN get involved in something like that, and some kind of war crimes commission become commissioned, if you like? Does somebody have to make a report somewhere?
Yeah, reports are fed to the UN. My understanding is there'll be 4 or 5 different countries who will send representatives to Kherson to do their investigations.
Yeah, okay. And as far as the rest of the country goes, how is it sort of settling?
Well, I think, as we said before, Putin's aim at the moment is to leave Ukraine a very dark and very cold place this winter. I don't think, as any of the analysts, any of the commenters have said, we're going to see a huge amount of military action, although, as we said before, we will, of course, as a country, keep up our support.
Yeah.
And we'll provide them the right kit and equipment that they need to see the winter through. But interestingly, the World Health Organization has been carrying out various reports and is saying that ultimately, at the moment, 50% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been damaged. And within that, sadly, 703 attacks on hospitals and healthcare facilities. So those are now facilities which are not fully operational. They're lacking electricity, water, and, of course, heating. So they've got real challenges ahead of them. On top of that, they're concerned about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. Only last Monday, Ukraine and Russia were trading blows, insulting one another as to who was firing missiles at the site. And that's pretty serious. And in fact, again, the International Atomic Agency have been in there, or they're sending in inspectors. And there was a comment which I picked up that even though there's been no direct impact on key nuclear safety and security systems at the plant, the shelling came dangerously close to them. And we're talking meters, not kilometers. And that was the IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, speaking. So,
and it's one of those things, isn't it, that because we don't hear about it too often, but we do hear about it occasionally, people are quite relaxed about it. And I've heard people in Ukraine are quite relaxed about it. But, I mean, should we be relaxed about something like that?
No, not at all. And that would create significant damage if a missile or if some sort of bomb was placed on one of those sites.
Or something like
that. He'd be looking at hundreds of kilometres of damage being created. But what I'm seeing at the moment, and I'm sure all our viewers are, that everything seems to be about the World Cup. Certainly not about Ukraine. So
and
we
funnily
mustn't
enough,
forget
Ukraine aren't in the
what's
World
going
Cup because Wales knocked them out in qualifying.
Yes.
And Russia were sort of not allowed to enter it because, I guess the World Cup's got enough controversy going on without all of that. But what's happening in the next few days?
Well, what we are seeing now, and some sort of good news, is, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, Russia had, they refused to sign an extension to the Ukraine grain agreement.
Yes.
That's a really significant agreement for Ukraine. It's about the only export they have at the moment, and it does affect all of us. Ukraine have, this year, already exported 11 million tonnes.
Yeah.
That goes to Africa and elsewhere. Thankfully, the Kremlin have agreed to extend it. The UN and Turkey were responsible for brokering a deal, and now Ukraine can benefit from a further 120 days being able to export their grain. It goes to Odessa, 2 other ports where Russian and other inspectors from the UN, Turkey, then check the contents, obviously, of the cargo before going on to their final destination.
Okay.
So that's some good news.
Right. That is some good news, and it's good to get some good news. We're almost out of time. Dramatically and diplomatically, the Russians are sort of obviously defending these accusations of war crimes by saying, well, war crimes happen on all sides, but there's no evidence of that necessarily, is there?
Look, I think from the very start, something seems to be embedded within Russian forces that rape and pillage is okay.
Right.
We've spoken with individuals in the next week or two. We'll be speaking to one of my former colleagues who came in the very start of these episodes, John Chapman.
Yeah.
He's back out in Ukraine. But this is something that they have been carrying on and carrying out since they've invaded Ukraine back in February.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a terrible shame. Hugh, thank you very much indeed. That's Hugh Andree. This is Mike Graham. That's Putin's War for this week. We'll see you next time.